Hello, and welcome to the Wheel of Crime podcast, the podcast where two ladies play games, mumble profanities, and laugh way too often. Also, this podcast does cover topics of sensitive nature, and as such, listener discretion is advised. Discretion, not description. Discretion is advised.
Hello, and welcome back to the Wheel of Crime podcast. Today, the day you are listening to this, is Remembrance Day, and my name is Jen.
My name is Emily, and yes, so Remembrance Day is here. I was trying to remember this before we started recording. Is this a Canadian-only holiday, or is this like a world holiday?
So Google tells me that most countries have their own Memorial Day that they generally honor. So, like, in Australia and New Zealand, it's apparently April 25th. In the UK, it's November 11th. Also, in the US, it looks like it's May 29th. And a bunch of different countries have their own dates. So it looks like us and the UK peoples are on the same page for this one.
So us and the UK share the same date, but the rest of the world has their own, just basically?
Basically.
Oh, all right. Yeah, no, that was just a thought that popped into my head, and honestly, I probably should have researched that in my notes, because that would make sense for today's episode. But I did not do that. But cool, as per usual, it sounds like Canada and England area are on the same page, which would make sense, since we are owned by the royalty.
We're not owned by the royalty. We are a Commonwealth country. Okay. There's a difference there.
Okay. I know nothing about history or politics, so I just roll with whatever I find out. But yeah, okay. And then I was going to ask you something else, but I can't quite remember. But yeah, welcome everybody. Today I feel like we're probably going to have some heavier stories, just since we are going to be doing a Remembrance Day theme to go with the holiday.
National Day of Mourning.
Yes, the day to go with the day that is today. So, how's your week been though?
It has been decent. I am still slightly sick, so that's super fun. But I'm definitely on the mend. Yeah, yesterday I took my first full day off in a while and did no work. Started doing a little bit of holiday shopping, just to get ahead of the ship times, because one of the things that I ordered for you, actually, I ordered it yesterday, and it's not supposed to come until December 13th or something.
Oh, fun.
So I'm like, good thing I ordered it now.
Yeah, I've got I literally have yours and John's Christmas gifts in one of my online cards, but I'm waiting until next week because the nature of the website that I'm not going to tell you is the longer you have something in your cart, the more likely you are to get coupons and stuff. And then there is supposed to be an event coming out next week where certain things are going on sale. So I'm like, okay, I'll wait a little bit, but not too long, because I was looking at the shipping times on one of the items, and it's the same thing where it's projected arrival date is second week of December, and I'm like, ooh.
It's cutting her close.
It's tight, but hopefully it works. But yeah, no, okay, I like that we're all on the same page then, because yeah, no, Christmas shopping is very stressful for me, so I try to do it not all at once, but to at least get an early enough start where I'm not panically looking for things the week before Christmas, because that never works out. And then as for myself, last week I've just been just chilling indoors because it's cold outside, obviously. And playing video games and reading books indoors, obviously, because that's just how it is. And
because that's what we do.
That's what happens. And yeah, that's about it. I guess if any of our listeners are into games, I've been playing this one called Harvestella, which is like Harvest Moon and Stardew Valley, and that one's been really fun. And And then I've been reading the fourth book of a series that I've been trying to get you to read for a while that I just received not that long ago.
Which series is that?
It's like the Gilded Prisoner series, I think it's called. It's like the one I told you about where the girl, she's like she's like made of gold, or she's got like a gold body or something, and it has like this whole like King Midas side to it, and it's like a fantasy type story. I've been trying to get you to read it because it's a little bit darker and I think you'd like it, but
Yes, I have been playing with my partner a game called The Last of Us, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. He's played it before, I never have, so we kind of started it at the beginning of October as like our Halloween play, but things got super busy, so we haven't finished it yet, but we were playing that for a while yesterday. And then I have been also, I also just started a new series for books. The what's it called? The Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas.
Sarah J. Maas. Yeah, you'll have to tell me what you think because I've really been hemming and hawing about that one for a while. I
literally just started, so I'm not very far in yet, but yeah, I'll definitely let you know. I'm liking it so far, but we'll see how the cards play out.
Okay, sounds good, because I've heard a lot of mixed opinions about it, so I would really like to hear what you think, because it was you who gave me the very insightful comment about how if you're struggling with a book, you can just DNF it anytime you want, all this other stuff.
Exactly.
So I would like to hear what you have to think. Your opinions matter to me.
Aw, thanks, bestie.
Yeah. All right. Well, on a different and slightly sadder note, we should start our Remembrance Day themed wheel of questions.
Yes, let's spin the wheel and see what we get.
So, how do you feel about graveyards in general?
Mixed. Not mixed. There's a sad place. Like in like some ways, like in movie and TV, like you get like the fun spooky vibes of it or whatever, but like in reality, just a very sad place. And the only time I've ever been to a graveyard has been at funerals, so probably not the fondest memories made there.
Okay. I had a feeling that would kind of be your opinion because that makes sense, obviously. For myself, I just remember like as a kid, I used to be like horribly terrified of graveyards. Like didn't want to go near them, anything like that. Now that I have been to one for somebody's funeral, I find them to be actually very peaceful. Like it's just people who miss people who are hanging out there, like, and hopefully that's it.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like all of the funerals I have been to were kind of like, they're all just like very sad. And a lot of them were either deaths when I was like young, like in middle school and earlier. And the only one I've been to like as like an adult, it was like a very sudden passing and then was followed by another close relative like a week later. So I don't know, very sad place in my opinion.
Yeah, you're like not my favorite. Yeah, no. So I went just from being absolutely terrified of them to now being like, yeah, I could have a picnic here. I might not like it, but I could do it.
Fair.
All right. Well, let's move on to our next question. Do you have any family who has served in the military, or do you know anybody who has?
I do have family who served in the military. One of my great grandfather, there might be another great I'm missing in there, served in World War II. So,
okay,
as part of the Canadian Armed Forces. And then I think I've had a few other like uncles and cousins serve, but it's always been like slightly removed from me because no one in my like immediate family has ever served. Whereas I feel like your experience is quite different.
Yeah. I feel like this is something we have briefly talked about on the show before. But I do, on one side of my family, have, well, actually, on both sides of my family, people served in the military. But on my dad's side, for example, it's more far removed, probably more similar to kind of what your experience is. Whereas my mother's grandfather, so I guess my great grandpa, one of his siblings was in the military and fought in World War II. And then my brother is in the Navy. So here we have it. There's two people that I know about. And then I do have another cousin who serves in the military as well, who is, I think, like one of my second or third cousins. So I see him every now and again. But yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I know your brother also, so
Yeah.
that's someone else I know who serves.
You're like, I have met him before. Yeah, and then just with working with the Canadian government, like I've mentioned before, as a teenager, I know lots of people who serve in the military now. Lots. It's just, yeah, it's a big part of my life that I don't really think about, actually, and that I am now thinking about.
Fair.
All right. I guess let's move on to our next question. So what do you normally do on Remembrance Day? I know that a lot of people like to go to, like, memorial services, or they'll try and, like, do something small, or, like, even just wearing the poppy while they're out doing things. Is there anything that you do particularly on Remembrance Day? Or for Remembrance Day?
I mean, this probably makes me a bad person, but I don't do too much. I wear my poppy. I donate to the cause, okay? That's what I do. But yeah, I feel like since leaving school, where it was like there was like kind of mandated things that we did on Remembrance Day, I don't really do too much. I'm usually working, so there's that. What about you?
Well, because of my previous life experience that I was just now thinking about, it was something similar where it was a more of a mandated thing when I was growing up to participate in a memorial ceremony, in attendance and performance. But as for after that, for a few years, I used to go with my mom to like the actual Memorial Day celebration that we would have in the downtown of the place that we're from. And then, of course, wearing the poppy and, like, doing other things. Nowadays, though, I don't do too much. Like, I'll try and watch, they usually have, like, a broadcasted one that they put up that I like to watch sometimes. But that's really about it. It's changed a lot since being a kid, but...
I feel like it's harder as an adult to carve out the time unless you... Like, I mean, obviously I had, like, my great-grandpa who served in World War II and died in World War II, but, like, it's kind of removed from me because I never met that person, so obviously it doesn't, like, it's still sad, but, like, it doesn't affect me in the same way that it would probably affect me if I was closer to him.
Oh, for sure,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so.
So I feel like, yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying, too. And it was also different, too, because I think also a big part of it is the last couple of years with COVID, you couldn't have bigger gatherings, so then more people were geared towards kind of like what I was saying that I've started doing is just watching the program, which doesn't really make you super involved, but I will also say that last year I completely forgot which day was Remembrance Day and then remembered about it on the 12th, which is not very useful. So.
No, one day too late.
One day too late. But yeah, that's all I got. We've one more question. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's spin away.
All right. What's your favorite flower?
I mean, on Remembrance Day, it's the poppy.
Of course.
On every other day of the year, I really like peonies or orchids.
Okay, good choices. Good choices. Also on the same train as you, Remembrance Day, obviously the poppy. That's like a no-brainer. For every other day of the year, I don't know. It changes a lot for me because I don't really think about it. Like the spring comes and I'm like, I love crocuses, and then I see like I'm like playing Animal Crossing and I'm like, I really love Lily of the Valley. And then I'll be doing something else and I'll be like, I really love tulips.
Tulips are a great choice, just overall.
Right?
I would say that's top 5 flower for me for sure.
All right. I would say the same, definitely. I'm just sad that they're annuals, so they don't come back every year. You have to replant the bulbs every year if you want to have tulips, and they're also really toxic to most animals.
Yeah.
Womp womp.
V sad, but V pretty.
Very pretty. But yeah, those are my questions for you. And now I'll do a description, a mysterious description about what we're going to be talking about today.
Oh, I'm ready. Tell me the mysterious description.
Yes, it's unheard of. So, Remembrance Day, also known as Poppy Day, owing to the tradition of wearing a remembrance poppy, is a memorial day observed in Commonwealth member states since the end of the First World War to honor armed force members who've died in the line of duty. Following a tradition inaugurated by George V, whatever Roman number that equates to, I don't know, in 1919, the day is also marked by war remembrances in many non-Commonwealth countries. In most countries, Remembrance Day is observed on the 11th of November to recall the end of the First World War hostilities. Hostilities formally ended at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, in accordance with the armistice signed by the representatives of Germany and the Entente between 5:12 and 5:20 that morning. At the 11th hour refers to the passing of the 11th hour, or in this case, 11 a.m. The First World War officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles on the 28th of June, 1919.
Yes, that is the history of World War II that we learned about in school.
Yes.
Very sad. I feel like there was lots of atrocities that happened during World War II, that it's really hard to like unpack them all, you know?
Oh, for sure. Definitely a lot to unpack, and almost once you start, it just starts getting worse, is also the other thing that I've noticed with history. So, overall, very sad, but glad that it did eventually come to its conclusion. And yeah, and now we're here to talk to you guys about some stories today.
Exactly. So, both Emily and I will be sharing a story with you today, and I am going to go first because just a little an extra content warning for you all. This is probably one of the worst atrocities that mankind has ever committed. So, lots of graphic things we're about to talk about. So I'll go first, and then Emily will hopefully end on a lighter note. I hope. As light as it can be, talking about war crimes. But
I am a little goofy, so in general, I think it will probably be slightly lighter.
yes. So I'm going to talk about a part of World War II that I feel like we didn't even really learn about in school, because it's a historical event that I personally didn't know much about until we graduated high school. But it's known as one of the worst atrocities committed during World War II. And obviously, just because of time constraints, I am going to give you the Cliff Notes version of what happened here and just some small snippets of some of the things that happened, because it's quite extensive, and if you're interested in learning more, you should definitely go look into it. So, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but have you ever heard of the Nanjing Massacre?
I haven't, but I will say, I did see a video that a guy made a little bit ago, and basically he collects World War II photographs and memorabilia, or not World War II, but basically just wartime stuff like that. I sent you the video. I'm not sure if you saw it, but basically this guy was talking about it a little bit, because he mentioned that this is something really horrible that had happened that was not documented. And that Japan today says never happened. But the guy who collects the memorabilia actually was sold a photo album from somebody who had saw what he does with photos from wartime stuff, and was like, oh, I have this like from my, grandfather, you can have it if you want. So he bought it off this guy, and it actually has photos, about 30 photos, he said, from the Nanjing Massacre, and that he doesn't know what to do with them now, because obviously they should go to a museum, but at the same time, not all museums are in the best interest of preserving parts of history that many people would rather forget. So I did send you that video. I'm not sure if you saw it, but I did think that was really interesting, and I don't know anything about the massacre. I just know, like I said, that it's something people want to cover up, and that's supposed to be really horrific. And that's all I know.
Yes, I actually did see that video a couple of days ago when it like first went up, and then I saw that you sent it to me also, which I thought was really interesting because this is the story that I'd kind of been planning on telling, and then I saw that video and I was like, yep, I gotta cover it. And then you sent that to me and I was like, well, she about to get educated today if she didn't know anything about it.
Okay, that's my thing, is that if I think it's something relevant to kind of how you tell your stories more, I really try my best not to look into things and just send them to you. But yeah, no, I know nothing, like I said, other than it's just supposed to be horrific and that somebody has photos of what actually happened. So that's all I got.
Yeah. Let's just dive right into it because it's a lot. Like I said, this is a Cliff Notes version. I really, really hope that people go further looking into this because it's a topic that deserves attention, in my opinion. Okay, let's just go into it. In August 1937, the Japanese army invaded Shanghai, where they met strong resistance and suffered heavy casualties. The battle was bloody as both sides faced attrition in urban hand-to-hand combat. By mid-November, the Japanese had captured Shanghai with the help of naval and aerial bombardment. The General Staff headquarters in Tokyo initially decided not to expand the war due to the high casualties incurred and low morale of the troops. Nevertheless, on December 1st, Japanese headquarters ordered the army to capture Nanjing, the then capital of Republic of China. According to one Japanese journalist embedded with imperial forces at the time, the reason the army advanced to Nanjing quite rapidly is due to herd mentality among the officers and men that they could loot and rape as they wish. For sake of time, I can't really cover much of the lead up to Japan's advancement from Shanghai to Nanjing, but they committed a lot of atrocities along the way that are equally as horrifying as what I'm about to tell you. So obviously the Chinese people and the army fought back as Japan approached, but on December 11th, 1937, Chinese soldiers were still residing in areas of the quote-unquote safety zone, meaning that it had become an intended target for Japanese attacks despite the majority of being innocent civilians. Efforts to remove these Chinese troops failed, and Japanese soldiers began to lob grenades into the refugee zone. The Nanjing garrison force set fire to buildings and houses in the areas. Targets within and outside the city walls, such as military barracks, private homes, the Chinese Ministry of Communication, forests, and even entire villages were completely burnt down. The estimated damage was $30 million in 1937, so the equivalent today would be around $619 million of damage.
Well, this is a lot so far, and I think you've only been telling your story for like 5 minutes, so I cannot imagine how the rest of this is gonna go.
Yeah. Prepare yourself. When I gave a content warning, I really, really mean it. Like, we're about to get into some very hard to hear things.
Right.
Many Westerners were living in the city at the time, conducting trade or on missionary trips. As the Japanese army approached Nanjing, most of them fled the city, leaving 27 foreigners. 5 of these were journalists who remained in the city a few days after it was captured, leaving the city on December 16th. 15 of the remaining 22 foreigners formed a committee called the International Committee for the Nanking Safety Zone in the western quarter of the city. The Japanese government had previously agreed not to attack parts of the city that did not contain Chinese military forces, and the members of the committee managed to persuade the Chinese government to move their troops out of the area. The Nanking Safety Zone was demarcated through the use of Red Cross flags. On December 1st, 1937, Nanjing Mayor Ma Chao-chen ordered all Chinese citizens remaining in Nanjing to move into the safety zone. Many fled the city on December 7th, and the International Committee took over as the de facto government of Nanjing. Chinese troops had almost completely surrounded 300,000 Chinese troops in the vicinity of Nanjing, and that preliminary negotiations suggested that all of the Chinese were ready to surrender. Prince Aska issued an order to kill all captives, thus providing official sanction for the crimes which took place during and after the battle. The Japanese military continued to move forward, breaching the last lines of the Chinese resistance and arriving outside the city gates of Nanjing on December 9th, 1937. At noon on December 9th, the Japanese military dropped leaflets into the city, urging the city of Nanjing to surrender within 24 hours, promising no mercy if the offer was refused. In the meantime, members of the committee proposed a plan for a 3-day ceasefire, during which the Chinese troops could withdraw without fighting, while the Japanese troops would stay in their present position. The Japanese awaited an answer to their demand for surrender, but no response was received by the Chinese by the deadline on December 10th. The Japanese general waited another hour before issuing the command to take Nanjing by force, but there was still no answer, so the Japanese army mounted its assaults on the Nanjing walls from multiple directions. With the relocation of the capital of China and the reports of the Japanese brutality, most of the civilian population fled Nanjing out of fear. Wealthy families were first to flee, leaving Nanjing in automobiles, followed by the evacuation of the middle class and then the poor, while the destitute lowest class remained behind. So really the people who were worst off got the brunt of what we're about to talk about. 3/4 of the population had fled Nanjing before the Japanese arrived. On December 12th, under heavy artillery fire and aerial bombardment, the Chinese government ordered his men to retreat. What followed was nothing short of chaos. Some Chinese soldiers stripped civilians of their clothing in a desperate attempt to blend in, and many others were shot by Chinese supervisors until they tried to flee. On December 13th, the Japanese army entered the city facing little military resistance, and Japanese troops persuaded the retreating Chinese army units. Soon after the fall of the city, Japanese troops made a thorough search for Chinese soldiers and arrested thousands of young Chinese men. Many were taken to the river, where they were machine gunned to death, and what was probably the single largest massacre of Chinese troops occurred along the banks of the river on December 18th. For the most of the morning, Japanese soldiers tied the prisoner of war's hands together. At dusk, the soldiers divided prisoners into 4 columns and opened fire. Unable to escape, the prisoners of war could only scream and thrash desperately. It took an hour for the sounds of death to stop, and even longer for the Japanese to bayonet each individual. The majority of the bodies were dumped directly into the river. The Japanese army conducted its mopping up operation inside and outside the Nanking safety zone. Since the area outside the safety zone had been almost completely evacuated, the mopping up effort was concentrated in the safety zone. The safety zone was packed with the remaining population of Nanjing, and the Japanese army leadership assigned sections of the safety zone to some units to separate alleged plain-clothed soldiers from the civilians. The number of Chinese soldiers in plain clothes that were executed is estimated to be around 4,000. So, as I mentioned, when the Japanese came into the city, chaos unleashed, and a lot of it was happening at once, but I'm going to tell you about one specific incident that occurred on December 13th, and it goes as follows. So about 30 soldiers came into a Chinese house in the southeastern part of Nanjing and demanded entrance. The door was opened by the landlord named Mohamedin Ha, and they killed him immediately with a revolver, and also Mrs. Ha, who knelt before them after her husband's death, begging them not to kill anyone else. Mrs. Ha asked them why they killed her husband, and they shot her. She was dragged out from under a table in the guest hall where she tried to hide with her 1-year-old baby. After being stripped and raped by one or more men, she was bayoneted in the chest and had a bottle thrust into her vagina. The baby was killed with a bayonet. Some soldiers then went to the next room where her parents, who were 76 and 74, were there with her other two daughters, who were 16 and 14, and they were about to rape the girls when the grandmother tried to protect them. The soldiers killed her with a revolver. The grandfather grasped the body of his dead wife and was killed. The two girls were then stripped, the elder being raped by 2 to 3 men, and the younger by 3 men. The older girl was stabbed afterwards, and a cane was rammed into her vagina. The younger girl was bayoneted, and the soldiers then bayoneted another sister who was also in the room. The last murders in the house were of another 2 children who were aged 4 and 2, and the brother was bayoneted and the younger split down through the head with a sword. This was only one of many incidences that occurred.
I see why you said this is heavy. Holy. And this is one of... Because this is a whole city.
This is a whole city, and this is just one incident that occurred on one day.
Horrifying, and I'm just like... I'm always shocked by how people get these terrible ideas and then follow through with them. Because really, like, half these things were unnecessary if the point was just to kill people, right?
Yeah, this particular massacre is also known as the Rape of Nanjing.
Okay.
So there's more to come, unfortunately.
Oh boy.
The International Military Tribune for the Far East estimated that 20,000 women, including some children and the elderly, were raped during the occupation, but later research from Yale University claimed that there was over 80,000 rapes. A large number of the rapes were done systematically by the Japanese soldiers as they went from door to door searching for girls, with many women being captured and gang raped. The women were often killed immediately after being raped, often by explicit mutilation, such as penetrating vaginas with bayonets, long sticks of bamboo, or other objects. Bodies of Chinese massacred by Japanese troops along the river of Nanjing pregnant women were targeted for murder, as their stomachs were often bayoneted, sometimes after rape. Tang Jungshan, a survivor and witness of the Japanese army's systematic mass killings, testified, "The 7th and last person in the first row was a pregnant woman. The soldier thought he might as well rape her before killing her, so he pulled her out of the group to a spot about 10 meters away. As he was trying to rape her, the woman resisted fiercely. The soldier abruptly stabbed her in the belly with a bayonet. She gave a final scream and her intestines spilled out. Then the soldier stabbed the fetus with its umbilical cord clearly visible and tossed it aside."
Again, just, it's so monstrous. How are so many people willingly a part of this?
We'll get to the theories of why this happened in a minute, but I'm just gonna go through a couple more horrible things for you. On December 19th, 1937, the Reverend James M. McCallum, who was one of the foreigners that was living within the safety zone at the time, wrote in his diary, quote, "I know not where to end. Never have I heard or read such brutality. Rape, rape, rape. We estimate that at least 1,000 cases a night and many by day. In case of resistance or anything that seems like disapproval, there is a bayonet, stab, or a bullet. People are hysterical. Women are being carried off every morning, afternoon, and evening. The whole Japanese army seems to be free and to go and come as it pleases and do whatever it pleases." On March 7th, 1938, Robert O. Wilson, a surgeon at the University Hospital in the safety zone, wrote a letter to his family saying, quote, "A conservative estimate of people slaughtered in cold blood is somewhere about 100,000, including the corpse of thousands of soldiers that had thrown down their arms. Two other excerpts from the surgeon in letters to his family stated, "The slaughter of civilians is appalling. I could go on for pages telling of cases of rape and brutality almost beyond belief. 2 bayoneted corpses are the only survivors of 7 street cleaners who were sitting in their headquarters when Japanese soldiers came in without warning or reason and killed 5 of their number and wounded the 2 that they found on their way to the hospital. Let me recount some instances occurring in the last 2 days. Last night, the house of one of the Chinese staff members of the university was broken into, and 2 of the women, his relatives, were raped. 2 girls, about 16, were raped to death in one of the refugee camps. In the university middle school, there were 8,000 people. The Japanese came in 10 times last night over the wall, stole clothing, food, and raped until they were satisfied. They bayoneted one little boy who had 5 bayonet wounds, including one that penetrated his stomach. A portion of his stomach was outside of the abdomen. I think he will live." And a former Japanese soldier named Shiro Azuma later spoke candidly about the process of rape and murder in Nanjing. And this is like one of the most chilling quotes, so be prepared for that. He said, "At first we used some kinky words like P can. P means hip, can means look. P can means let's see a woman open up her legs. Chinese women didn't wear underpants. Instead they wore trousers, tied with a string. There was no belt. As we pulled the string, the buttocks were exposed. We P can. We looked. After a while, we would say something like, 'It's my day to take a bath,' and we took turns raping them. It would be all right if we only raped them. I shouldn't say all right, but we always stabbed and killed them because dead bodies don't talk."
Yikes. Ooh, all right.
Literally, I have chills.
That particular quote, though, "dead bodies don't talk," I hear it weirdly a lot whenever people try to justify why they murder people. It's because they do something that they know is horrific, and then it's meant to, like, cover up or, like, to free them of the guilt of what they've done. And it's all very, very icky. Yikes. Ugh, okay. I got nothing more to add to that.
There are also accounts of Japanese troops coercing families to commit incestuous acts. Sons were coerced to rape their mothers, fathers were forced to rape their daughters, and brothers were forced to rape their sisters. Cases of gun wounds continued to come to the hospital for a matter of some 6 or 7 weeks following the fall of the city on December 13th. The capacity of the hospital was normally 180 beds, and this was kept full to overflowing during this entire period. American Vice Consul James Epstein arrived in Nanjing on January 6, 1938, to reopen the American embassy. He gave a summarized description of what happened to the city. Quote, "The picture they painted of Nanking was one of a reign of terror that befell the city upon its occupation by the Japanese military forces. Their stories of those of the German residents tell of the city having fallen into the hands of the Japanese as captured prey, not merely taken to the course of organized warfare, but seized by invading armies whose members seem to have set upon the prize to commit unlimited depredations and violence. Fuller data of our own observations have not brought out facts to discredit their information. The civilian Chinese population remaining in the city crowded the streets of the so-called safety zone as refugees, many of whom are destitute. Physical evidence is almost everywhere of the killing of men, women, and children, of breaking into the looting of property, and the burning and destruction of houses and buildings. It remains, however, the Japanese soldiers swarmed over the city in thousands and committed untold atrocities. It would seem, according to the stories told to us by foreign witnesses, that the soldiers were let loose like a barbarian horde to desecrate the city. Men, women, and children were killed in uncounted numbers throughout the city. Stories heard of civilians being shot or bayoneted for no apparent reason. So, Instead of punishing the Japanese troops who were responsible for the rapes, the Japanese expeditionary force in central China issued an order to set up comfort houses during this period of time because Japan was afraid of criticism from China, the United States, and Europe following the case of massive rapes between battles in Shanghai and Nanjing. There's no obvious explanation for this grim event, nor can one be found. The Japanese soldiers who had expected an easy victory instead had been fighting hard for months and had taken in infinitely higher casualties than anticipated. They were bored, angry, frustrated, and tired. The Chinese women were undefended, and their menfolk powerless or absent. The war, still undeclared, had no clear-cut goal or purpose. Perhaps all Chinese, regardless of age or sex, seemed marked out as victims. The dehumanization of Chinese people and the Japanese education system is also blamed for why many ordinary soldiers were eager to engage in atrocities. So the Japanese government either destroyed or concealed important documents, severely reducing the amount of evidence available for this event. And between the declaration of a ceasefire on August 15th, 1945, and the arrival of American troops in Japan on August 28th, the Japanese military and civil authorities systematically destroyed military, naval, and government archives, much of which was from the period of 1942 to 1945. Overseas troops of the Pacific and East Asia were ordered to destroy incriminating evidence of war crimes. Approximately 70% of Japanese Army's wartime records were destroyed. The records to the Nanjing Massacre, Japanese authorities deliberately concealed, eluding confiscation from American authorities. Some of the concealed information was made public a few decades later, and the death toll of civilians is really difficult to calculate due to many bodies deliberately burnt, buried in mass graves, or dumped in the river, but the estimated death toll was at least 200,000 civilians, but later estimates had it closer to 300,000 civilians, but it's not confirmed. So, and then obviously there was some trials that happened afterward, but we don't have time to go into those, unfortunately. But on November 12th, 1948, 7 Japanese convicted 8 Class A war criminals were sentenced to death by hanging. All of them were hung on December 23rd, 1948, and 18 others received lesser sentences. And that's all.
That's all she says, brightly.
So there's a brief history of one of the worst things that ever happened.
Literally, the only thought that I have in my head right now is like, you know how every now and again you'll read a story where like people are like describing something that happened and it's like they befell upon us like a horde of demons, like, you know, that particular idiom when people are describing like being attacked by an opposing force. This is one of those situations where I genuinely feel like those were not people, those were demons. Because I cannot even begin to picture in my head how people, like, and so many of them, can just turn into these monsters and just rape and massacre and do all these other horrific things to people and then feel justified for it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talk about how, as I mentioned, the Japanese school system kind of trained these behaviors into the minds of their citizens about, you know, not liking Chinese people. And I think that the school system really villainized Chinese people. So when these soldiers grew up and were in this situation, they kind of had that programming in them, right?
Okay. I don't know. I still feel like there's something more. Like, it feels like there's like a missing piece of information as to like what really triggered the majority of these behaviors, right?
I mean, if you were going to ask me for my best guess, I would feel like it's a combination of school systems and the way that this information was presented to them, and also just like genuine hatred for these people, because a lot of these men who had been through war already were tired and probably angry and had lost their own loved ones in this war, and they were just taking all this hate and anger out on these innocent people, which is not justifiable at all, but I feel like that's probably where it came from. You know, they already had these negative connotations, and then through war and loss and whatever else, it kind of reinforced those ideas in their heads.
But yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna have anything more to add to your story, but yeah, no, you weren't kidding. That is probably one of the most horrific things I have ever heard in my life. I can't even imagine how your research went.
It was an interest, like, the hard part was, like, there's just so many different stories of, like, awful things. So, yeah, reading them all was, not great for my mental health, probably. Um,
Somehow I can see
something
that.
for therapy.
Yeah, definitely something to say for therapy. Well, I guess I could start my story, which is significantly lighter than what you've just given me.
Good, I'm glad.
Basically, I've put together a bunch of like really small little blurbs about spooky things related to war. Uh, so I'll just get started then.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so basically, with a history as old as the United States itself, there's no doubt that there are plenty of ghost stories from specifically the U.S. military's almost 246 active years, that they've had the military for. There are lots of different ghost stories that have come out of these different wars that the states specifically has gotten into. So I have together here a list for you.
Ooh, some spooky tales.
Yes. So most of these are very brief, just because, as true to most ghost stories, it's a word of mouth type story. So it's not like there's anything too substantial beyond kind of what we already know. So fairly brief for each thing, but they are interesting to say the least. So to start with, there is the USS Hornet's ghostly inhabitants. So, the USS Hornet and her crew served in World War II and the Vietnam War, achieving numerous awards for service and operations. She was also the prime recovery ship for the Apollo 11 and 12 missions. During her active years, about 300 crew members died from accidents and suicides. Visitors to the ship's permanent location in San Francisco reported hearing voices and seeing apparitions of soldiers. Electronic equipment is also known to go haywire while on board, and now it is the host of ghost tours. The USS Hornet holds the title of the most haunted ship in America.
A spooky ship that has been on the ocean, which is even spookier.
Yes, I actually really like the idea of ghost ships. That's something that I've always found just to be like really intriguing. Just because when you think about like how people used to like sail for like weeks at a time to get to a new country, and then they would have to get like a horse and then ride that horse across the country, like no plane, no car. There's probably a lot of like haunted things that would happen because if you do these things for long enough, it's like, definitely spooky to me. But that would be my first story for you. So now I'm gonna go to my second one.
Okay.
So then we have the USS Arizona. So we have another haunted ship, basically, and it's from the same era. So World War II era Navy ship, the USS Arizona. So when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, the Arizona became a mass tomb for the 1,102 that had perished with her. She serves as an underwater graveyard and a memorial to those that had died during this tragic event. However, many believe that the dead did not go in peace and still haunt the area. Today, officers blame a ghost named Charlie for many of the eerie happenings near the location of the USS Arizona. And this famous apparition is reportedly harmless, only turning on water faucets and causing heavy doors to swing open and closed. But another ghost, however, inspires more fear. One of the soldiers who abandoned his post during the bombings allegedly haunts the deck of the ship at low tide, inspiring fear and sadness in visitors to the memorial.
I hope that you tell your brother who's in the Navy about all these haunted ghost ships and that it gives him sweet dreams at night.
Yes. I'll just have to direct him to our episode and be like, hey, you should listen to this. It's very relevant to your current career. And then he probably won't do that. So, but steering away from ghost ships, I have Fort Leavenworth. So the U.S. Army garrison Fort Leavenworth was widely considered one of the most haunted posts in America. Though it's still actively used today, residents and visitors claim that it is a host to a myriad of ghosts that wander its buildings and grounds. One of the more famous haunts is Gen, or General George Armstrong Custer. That's a mouthful. Who is said to roam the general's residence while also haunting another site on this list. Though he did not die here, his spirit is said to remain after he was found guilty of mistreating his troops and deserting his command. But some of the buildings are more haunted than others. The Rookery at 14 Summer Place is considered to be both the oldest and the most haunted. The U.S. Army reports numerous incidents that ever happened to Rookery residents, including missing items, unexplained noises, spectral visitors, and more. One of the ghosts is said to be a woman with long hair who attacks residents by clawing at them with her fingernails. Another haunted site is the St. Ignace Chapel, which has been rebuilt multiple times due to fires, and a house now stands at the first location of the chapel, but residents have claimed to see the ghost of a young priest who had died in the fire. As for the rebuilt chapel, it inexplicably burned to the ground again in 2000.
That's spooky.
Very. Then we have the never-ending Battle of the Little Bighorn. So, though the Battle of the Little Bighorn happened in 1873, present-day visitors to the battlefield claim they can still hear and see spirits of the U.S. Army soldiers and Native American warriors fighting. Now a cemetery and a national monument, it is no surprise that this site of such death and violence is haunted by those that passed there, including, as I mentioned previously, U.S. Army General George Armstrong Custer. And Stonehouse in the late 19th century, cemetery caretaker's house located there is home to many apparitions, including mutilated soldiers and headless cavalrymen. The Crow tribe called those that lived in this house during the 1800s ghost herders. They saw the flag that the caretakers had raised and lowered as a signal for the spirits to come out at dusk and then return to their graveyards at dawn.
At least they're on a schedule?
I mean, a 24-hour haunting is not ideal, so I guess a 12-hour one is, like, preferable if I had to choose one.
Good compromise. You know, the ghosts are like, listen, we've got a plan. This is what we're gonna do. You're either gonna be here when we're haunting or you're not. That's up to you. That's your call.
Basically, yeah. And is that what it is? So, next I have the Jefferson Barracks. So, Missouri's Jefferson Barracks are now home to the Army and Air National Guard, but a spooky sentry with a bullet hole through his head allegedly still confronts soldiers in the barracks headquarters. Legend has it he still thinks that he's on duty during a munitions raid and believes the living soldiers are his enemies. A soldier was once so scared by this bloody sentry that he left his post in the army altogether, according to one story. Another older story tells of a Halloween party at the Veterans Hospital in a part of the barracks where a Civil War-era ghost made an appearance. A man in a strikingly realistic Civil War officer's uniform made an appearance before the party's host. When the host asked him how he liked the party, the man was rude and then disappeared. Later, when the host asked about the guest, nobody knew him or anybody who wore that costume to the event.
Oh, I don't like that.
See,
if I was the host of that party, I'd be like,
yeah, right?
I don't appreciate that.
That's actually one type of ghost story where it's like you see them and you interact with them and then they leave and nobody knows what you're talking about. That always kind of makes me feel like it gives me extra goosebumps. Because I'm like,
it doesn't sit right.
That interaction is so real that obviously you're asking people like about this person and nobody knows what you're talking about.
Oh, I hate that.
Right?
I hate that
Barfalicious.
so much.
And then
That is barfalicious.
Yeah, right? I always like to think that like those stories that make me a little nauseous and give me goosebumps, those are like cream of the crop stories,
Sure are.
right? But I do only have one more short ghost story for you. And this one is called The Monster in the Mountains. So, though this particular one isn't based in the United States, it definitely deserves an honorable mention in my little list here. So, basically, during World War II, a remote village in Switzerland became the site of strange happenings when a British company of soldiers stayed there. Wood, tarps, and valuables began disappearing, which were dismissed until a child then went missing. When more children, as well as a private from the British company, disappeared as well, rumors of a monster started to spread. And so one night, soldiers saw a mysterious figure and chased after it, thinking that it was this being that was preying on the villagers. And though they never caught the figure, the soldiers then discovered a cave. Shots were fired from inside the cave, and the soldiers returned fire. Upon pressing further into the cave, soldiers found the body of the British private who had been shot through the heart. He was surrounded by the half-eaten bodies of all of the children that had went missing.
I would hate that. That does not sound good at all.
Not a ghost story, but still very spooky.
Arguably very, very spooky.
Yes, a horrifically spooky, one could say. But yeah, and that concludes my wee little list for you of wartime ghost stories that I thought were really interesting.
Yes. And that concludes the Remembrance Day special of this podcast episode. I guess what we learned, important to wear a poppy because, you know, bad things happened and war is not good.
No, and it has affected clearly very, very many people all through time. So slap that poppy on and thank a veteran.
Yeah.
Yes, but that does conclude today's episode. So if you like today's episode, you can always leave us a review on wherever you're listening to podcasts now. 5 stars and a nice word do help us with the algorithms and stuff, so that's greatly appreciated. Besides that, we do also have our social media, which is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Wheel of Crime. If you would like to send us a message or get into contact with us, our email is wheelofcrime@gmail.com. We also have a website, which is www.wheelofcrime.com, if you'd like to check us out there. If you'd like to donate to the show, you can get access to our Patreon, which is Wheel of Crime at Patreon on the Patreon website. If you guys want to send in a listener story, the Google Doc is open, and you can find that on our social media as well.
We are currently accepting listener stories for our upcoming Christmas special, so send us your festive spooks, stories, and crimes. Yes, and that concludes our episode for today. We hope that you all have a good week, and we will see you next week for another new episode. Okay, bye.
Bye!